There are moments in history when nature seems to rebel against the laws we thought governed it. When the impossible becomes visible, undeniable, captured in photographs that look like they've been torn from the pages of mythology rather than newspapers. Water, the very element we associate with extinguishing flames, transformed into fuel. Rivers that should have flowed became conduits of fire. Seas that should have swallowed heat instead erupted in infernos so bright they could be seen for miles. These are not legends. These are not the fevered imaginings of ancient storytellers trying to explain the unexplainable. These are documented incidents, witnessed by thousands, recorded by cameras, investigated by governments, and forever seared into the collective memory of our industrial age. The sea caught fire. Rivers burned with flames that reached 5 stories high. Water became the enemy of itself. And in those moments of unnatural combustion, humanity was forced to confront a truth we had been ignoring for decades: that our progress, our prosperity, our very way of life had poisoned the arteries of our planet so thoroughly that even water, ancient, essential, life-giving water, could no longer be water anymore. This is the story of those fires, of the rivers that raged with flames instead of currents, of the ocean that boiled with a ring of fire so perfect it looked like the eye of some ancient, angry god. These incidents span more than a century, touching continents, connecting cities, and ultimately changing the course of environmental history. The tale begins not in some distant, primitive past, but in the heart of America's Industrial Revolution, in a city that would become synonymous with both the promise and the peril of unchecked progress. Cleveland, Ohio, 1868. The Cuyahoga River winds through the city like a crooked serpent, its name derived from the Iroquois word meaning crooked river. For centuries, it had been crooked only in geography, but by the middle of the 19th century, it had become crooked in character as well, twisted, corrupted, transformed from a natural waterway into something no river was ever meant to be. The first time it caught fire, most people barely noticed. A spark, an ignition, flames dancing briefly across an oil slick before firefighters managed to contain the blaze. It was treated as an anomaly, a freak accident, nothing to concern the bustling, thriving city that had built its fortune along these banks. But the river would burn again, and again, and again. 1883, 1887, 1912. In that last fire, 5 people died. Sparks had ignited leaking oil, triggering explosions that tore through the riverfront. The flames consumed everything in their path: boats, bridges, buildings. The heat was so intense that metal twisted and wood vaporized. Yet even death could not slow the march of industry. The factories continued their work. The refineries kept pumping. The river kept receiving their waste. By the early 20th century, Cleveland had become a major industrial powerhouse. Steel mills lined the Cuyahoga's banks like iron giants. Oil refineries, 20 of them by the end of the Civil War, processed crude into the fuel that powered America's explosive growth. Paint factories, chemical plants, shipbuilding yards, paper mills, all found their home along this convenient river that could carry away whatever they needed to dispose of. And dispose they did. Oil slicks became so common they were considered normal. The river didn't flow. It oozed, thick and black, carrying not just water, but decades of accumulated industrial waste. Animal carcasses floated by, bloated beyond recognition. Rats the size of dogs drifted past workers who had learned not to look, not to smell, not to think too deeply about what it meant that their river had become this. The fires continued. 1922, 1936, a conflagration that burned for 5 days. 1941, 1948, and then came 1952. November 1st. The flames erupted with a fury that dwarfed all previous incidents. 3 tugboats were destroyed. A bridge was consumed. 3 office buildings were reduced to ash. The ship repair yards burned completely. The damage exceeded $1 million, more than $11 million in today's currency. The photographs from that day show firefighters standing on bridges, spraying water onto an inferno that seemed determined to prove that water itself could be defeated. But even this catastrophe wasn't enough. The economy was booming. Jobs were plentiful. Pollution, many believed, was simply the price of prosperity. Cleveland was producing. Cleveland was growing. And if the river had to burn occasionally, well, that was just part of living in a successful industrial city. The attitude pervaded not just Cleveland, but cities across America. The Buffalo River in New York caught fire in 1968, ignited by a worker's careless touch. The Rouge River in Detroit erupted in flames that reached 50 feet into the air, visible from the interstate highway. The Schuylkill River in Philadelphia had burned multiple times, starting as far back as 1892, when leaked oil caught fire from a tossed match. The Chicago River had its own history of flames. Rivers burning had become an American tradition, a dark mark of industrial success that few questioned and fewer fought to prevent. Then came June 22nd, 1969. It was a Sunday morning, warm, unremarkable, the kind of day when most people were thinking about church or breakfast or the quiet pleasures of a day off work. At the Republic Steel Mill, where the Cuyahoga River curved through Cleveland's industrial heart, something familiar was about to happen. A passing freight train rolled across the railroad bridge. Sparks flew. Below, on the river's surface, a thick oil slick waited like kindling. The fire erupted at noon. Witnesses later described flames that reached as high as 5 stories. The river itself seemed to be screaming, a roar of combustion that could be heard blocks away. Smoke billowed into the clear summer sky, dark and toxic. 3 battalions of firefighters rushed to the scene. A fireboat battled the blaze from the water. A surreal image. A boat, surrounded by water, fighting fire on water. 20 minutes. That's all it lasted. The flames were contained. The oil burned away. The danger passed. The damage was assessed, approximately $50,000, mostly to 2 railroad bridges. No injuries. No deaths. By Cleveland standards, by Cuyahoga standards, it was almost mundane. No photographer captured the moment. By the time local media arrived, the fire was out, leaving only smoke and the smell of burned oil. The Cleveland papers gave it minimal coverage. It seemed like just another fire on a river that had caught fire at least 13 times before. But this fire was different, not in its intensity, not in its damage, but in its timing. A day after the fire, Cleveland's mayor, Carl Stokes, the first black mayor of a major American city, stood at the riverfront with reporters. He had been pushing for environmental reforms, had gotten voters to approve a $100 million bond for river cleanup the year before. This fire, small as it was, gave him the platform he needed. And then Time magazine picked up the story. August 1st, 1969. The magazine launched a new section on the environment with an article about America's polluted waterways. At its center was the Cuyahoga River fire. The article described a river that oozes rather than flows, where a person does not drown but decays. The words were vivid, damning, impossible to ignore. The photograph accompanying the article showed a river engulfed in massive flames, firefighters battling an inferno. It was dramatic, shocking, the perfect image to illustrate environmental catastrophe. There was just one problem. The photograph wasn't from the 1969 fire. It was from 1952, 17 years earlier. But by the time anyone noticed, it didn't matter. The image had been seared into the national consciousness. The Cuyahoga River fire became the symbol of environmental destruction, the moment America supposedly woke up to the crisis it had created. The truth, as always, was more complicated. What Time magazine didn't report was that Cleveland had already started cleaning up its river. The $100 million bond passed in 1968 wasn't a reaction to the '69 fire. It preceded it. Local businesses, tired of the fires and the damage they caused, had been pushing for reforms for years. The tide was already turning. Nationally, changes were in motion as well. The Water Pollution Control Act had become law in 1965. States across the country were enacting their own environmental regulations. The 1969 fire wasn't the beginning of environmental awareness. It was a symbol of battles already being fought. But symbols matter. Sometimes they matter more than facts. The Cuyahoga River fire captured something that statistics and policy papers could not. It made the invisible visible. It transformed abstract concerns about pollution into a concrete, undeniable image: water on fire. The very impossibility of it forced people to confront how far we had strayed from the natural order. The momentum that had been building exploded. On April 22, 1970, millions of Americans participated in the first Earth Day. College students, including recent high school graduate Tim Donovan, who had spent his summer working along the polluted Cuyahoga, marched to rivers and demanded change. In December of that year, President Richard Nixon established the Environmental Protection Agency, creating for the first time a federal agency dedicated to protecting the environment. In 1972, Congress passed the Clean Water Act, landmark legislation that remains one of the most important environmental laws ever enacted. It set ambitious goals: eliminate all pollutant discharge into navigable waters by 1985, make all water safe for fishing and swimming by 1983, prohibit all toxic pollutants. The Cuyahoga became a symbol not just of environmental degradation, but of the power of public awareness to drive change. Songs were written about the burning river. Randy Newman penned "Burn On" in 1972. REM referenced it in their 1986 song Cuyahoga. It appeared in television shows, became part of jokes about Cleveland, was immortalized in textbooks. And slowly, painfully, the river began to heal. By 1989, the Cuyahoga was no longer flammable. Fish had returned to sections that had been dead zones for decades. The water no longer oozed. It flowed. It even sparkled sometimes. catching sunlight like a normal river. In 2019, 50 years after that fateful fire, the American Rivers Conservation Association named the Cuyahoga River of the Year in honor of its environmental resurgence. The story might have ended there, a tale of environmental catastrophe transformed into environmental triumph, proof that humanity could recognize its mistakes and correct them. But on July 2nd, 2021, halfway around the world, the ocean itself caught fire. The Gulf of Mexico, 5:15 in the morning, off the coast of the Yucatan Peninsula. Workers on the Kumalubzop offshore oil platform noticed something wrong, a gas leak. Not uncommon in offshore drilling, but always dangerous. They followed protocol, began assessment procedures, started containment measures. Then the gas ignited. What happened next looked like something torn from a fantasy film, an image so surreal that when videos appeared on social media, many people assumed they were watching special effects. A perfect circle of flames erupted on the surface of the ocean, roughly 150 yards from the platform. Orange fire boiled up from beneath the waves, creating a vortex of combustion that looked exactly like an enormous eye staring up from the depths. The Eye of Fire, as it was immediately dubbed, raged for more than 5 hours. 4 ships surrounded the inferno, spraying water at flames that should not have existed. Water fighting water that was burning. The absurdity of the scene was matched only by its horror. This was the ocean, vast, powerful, the ultimate symbol of nature's dominance over human industry. And it was on fire. The cause, according to Pemex, the Mexican state-owned oil company that operated the platform, was a ruptured underwater pipeline. A lightning storm with heavy rain had affected equipment. Gas leaked from the pipeline, rose to the surface, and somehow ignited. The company claimed the incident caused no oil spill, generated no environmental damage beyond the gas that burned away. Environmental groups disputed this immediately. For flames that large and sustained to persist on open ocean, an enormous amount of natural gas must have been leaking continuously. And before it ignited, how long had that gas been escaping into the water? How much methane, a greenhouse gas 84 times more potent than carbon dioxide over 20 years, had been released into the atmosphere? The footage went viral. Millions watched in horror as the ocean burned. Climate activists, including Greta Thunberg, pointed to the incident as proof of the catastrophic cost of fossil fuel dependence. Politicians called for moratoriums on offshore drilling. Commentary flooded social media. We know we're doing our best for the planet when we have to spray water on the ocean because we set it on fire. The comparisons to the Cuyahoga River fire were inevitable and immediate. Here, once again, was water transformed into fuel. Once again, an industrial accident so visually stunning that it forced people to confront truths they might otherwise ignore. Once again, the impossible made real, captured on camera, spread around the world. But unlike the Cuyahoga Fire of 1969, which came at the culmination of a growing environmental movement, the Eye of Fire appeared in a world already deeply divided over climate change and environmental protection. Some saw it as a wake-up call. Others saw it as an isolated incident, a freak accident that didn't represent the safety of modern drilling operations. The fire was fully extinguished by 10:45 that morning. The investigation, Pemex announced, was ongoing. Life returned to normal at the platform. The news cycle moved on. But the questions remained. How many more underwater pipelines were aging, corroding, waiting to rupture? How much of our energy infrastructure was built on the premise that the ocean was too vast to be harmed, too powerful to be defeated? The Eye of Fire wasn't the only water fire that year. In May, flames erupted from the ocean at Aja Beach in Lagos, Nigeria. In July, just days after the Gulf of Mexico incident, a mud volcano near Baku, Azerbaijan, exploded with a fireball visible from the city's promenade. In India, Bellandur Lake in Bangalore had been catching fire regularly since 2015, its surface covered with a toxic froth of industrial chemicals and sewage that ignited multiple times, including a blaze in February 2017 that burned for nearly 8 hours. The problem, it seemed, had not been solved. It had simply moved, spreading from the industrial heartlands of America to the developing nations racing to catch up, repeating the same mistakes, burning the same waters. Look at the pattern across time and you see a story that repeats with eerie consistency. Industrial growth outpaces environmental awareness. Prosperity is prioritized over preservation. Water becomes a convenient dumping ground because it flows away, carrying problems downstream, out of sight, out of mind. The pollution accumulates: oil, chemicals, sewage, waste. The water changes. It thickens, darkens, loses its life. It becomes something other than water. And then, inevitably, it catches fire. The response follows a predictable arc. Initial indifference. Fires are just part of doing business. Growing concern as the fires become more frequent, more damaging. A catalyst moment, often a fire that happens to capture public attention, that gets photographed or reported at just the right time. Public outrage, political action, regulations, cleanup. The Cuyahoga followed this pattern across a century. 13 documented fires, possibly dozens more that went unrecorded, before the 1969 blaze finally sparked lasting change. The Rouge River in Detroit, the Buffalo River in New York, the Chicago River in Illinois, all followed similar trajectories. The international incidents follow the same script. India's Bellandur Lake catches fire repeatedly while the nation's environmental regulations struggle to keep pace with rapid industrialization. The Gulf of Mexico burns, while debates rage over the balance between energy needs and environmental protection. But here's what's different now. We know better. We have the Cuyahoga River as a warning. We have the Clean Water Act as a model. We have decades of environmental science, mountains of data, countless studies showing the long-term costs of short-term thinking. And yet the fires continue.
Look at the pattern across time, and you see a story that repeats with eerie consistency.
Industrial growth outpaces environmental awareness. Prosperity is prioritized over preservation. Water becomes a convenient dumping ground because it flows away, carrying problems downstream, out of sight, out of mind. The pollution accumulates: oil, chemicals, sewage, waste. The water changes. It thickens, darkens, loses its life. It becomes something other than water. And then, inevitably, it catches fire. The response follows a predictable arc. Initial indifference. Fires are just part of doing business. Growing concern as the fires become more frequent, more damaging. A catalyst moment, often a fire that happens to capture public attention, that gets photographed or reported at just the right time. Public outrage, political action, regulations, cleanup. The Cuyahoga followed this pattern across a century. 13 documented fires, possibly dozens more that went unrecorded, before the 1969 blaze finally sparked lasting change. The Rouge River in Detroit, the Buffalo River in New York, the Chicago River in Illinois, all followed similar trajectories. The international incidents follow the same script. India's Bellandur Lake catches fire repeatedly, while the nation's environmental regulations struggle to keep pace with rapid industrialization. The Gulf of Mexico burns, while debates rage over the balance between energy needs and environmental protection. But here's what's different now. We know better. We have the Cuyahoga River as a warning. We have the Clean Water Act as a model. We have decades of environmental science, mountains of data, countless studies showing the long-term costs of short-term thinking. And yet the fires continue.